We have new information in a case that will make you angry and sick. This is video per Fox Carolina of a mom who is accused of murdering her 4-year-old son. These parents allegedly forced that child to drink from a toilet in a horrific case of child abuse that prosecutors say is a murder case. I'm going to warn you, the details of what police found when they responded to the family's home, they are not easy to hear. It was a boy so allegedly malnourished and abused, he looked like just, quote, skin and bones. And that's not all. The new details in the death of a child at the hands of his own mom, allegedly, as well as a member of law enforcement. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Stories like this trigger every negative emotion you have. Cases of child abuse where the victim is so young, the victim was so vulnerable, how it all allegedly happened at the hands of the people that child was supposed to trust. And then you hear new details in this case and all those emotions get worse. Now you might remember these mugshots. We have covered this story before. The mugshots of 30-year-old Joshua Latimer and his wife, Isiah Dionne. This is from when the story first broke back in September. They live in Oconee County, South Carolina. It's a rural part of that state, not far from the Georgia line. Now, we just learned some new details in this case because Dionne, the mom, appeared in court and asked for bond, believing that she should be given the opportunity to get out of jail as this trial goes on. We'll talk a little bit about what the judge decided in just a moment. This video per Fox Carolina. The story centers around the victim in this case. And before I get to the new details that we learned, and we will get into those, I think it's important to remember what this is about. 4-year-old Isiah Dionne. He spent the first few years of his life living with his grandmother, but then, according to Fox Carolina, the only TV station for this bond hearing where all this information came in, once Isiah Dionne started dating Joshua Latimer, her soon-to-be husband, that is when Isiah went to live with her mom and stepdad. Now, his stepdad was a South Carolina Highway Patrol Lance Corporal. His name, Joshua Latimer. Now, it seems like, on the surface, going to live with your mom, who's married to a member of law enforcement, that would be a safe house. But with what's being accused in this case, that could not have been further from the truth.
The cardiac arrest at Paula to be a juvenile patient.
That's the radio chatter from September 19th. It was around 6:20 in the morning when EMTs were dispatched to the couple's house. Originally, this call was for a boy in cardiac arrest. In the most recent bond hearing, we learned that Isiah was cold to the touch when EMTs arrived on scene, according to prosecutors. Fox Carolina says that the prosecutor on this case told the court, quote, he was basically skin and bones, for a lack of a better word. One of the EMS personnel basically described it as similar to something you'd see on TV, to children starving in Africa, end quote. Now, in this bond hearing, we learned how prosecutors believe that Isiah got to the point that he was so malnourished and allegedly abused that he weighed just 21 pounds. At 4 years old, this boy should be between 30 to 40 pounds, if not more. Now, we have the arrest warrant that states that Isiah's eyes were sunken into his head. His ribs and other bony prominences were visible. The warrant states that both Dionne and Latimer showed, quote, an extreme indifference to life, and it points out that the two allegedly did not seek any medical care for that young boy. And when you hear that, as bad as it sounds, with what I'm about to tell you, that's frankly putting it lightly. Prosecutors say that Dionne and Latimer allegedly would not let the boy drink water, that they would withhold it. So Isiah was allegedly forced to drink from a toilet. Prosecutors argue that Isiah was forced to sleep on a blanket. He had no bed, he had no mattress. His room had curtains allegedly stapled to the wall to block the sunlight from getting in. He also had allegedly been locked in closets. For as shocking and sad as all of this is, perhaps there are some neighbors in rural South Carolina who now wish they had spoken up. Some have told police that when they saw Isiah, this 4-year-old boy, he would eat adult-sized portions of food to the point that it was bizarre, according to Fox Carolina, but no one reported anything to police. And frankly, who would expect that something like this was allegedly happening inside your neighbor's house? It's unclear what the dynamics were inside the home, what Destiny Dionne and Joshua Latimer may say if this case goes to trial. Now, we looked up both of them on truthfinder.com. Obviously not a surprise with Latimer being a member of law enforcement. It doesn't appear that he has any sort of criminal record. And Destiny Dionne also doesn't appear to have any sort of run-ins previously with law enforcement. Certainly now, though, they are facing some incredibly serious and disturbing charges. Here at Law&Crime, we use Truthfinder just like this to learn more about the people who are involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it's a great resource to give you some peace of mind because it's one of the largest public record search services in the US, and it has a paid subscription service so you can get unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Now, as far as medical care, in court, prosecutors say the 4-year-old did not see a doctor for 2 years. What makes this even sadder, more shocking, more frustrating, more angering is that Isiah was not living in this home alone. There was another child who lived in this home, and that child, according to law enforcement, was not the victim of abuse like Isiah allegedly was, because that child was taken to the hospital, was brought to medical care. It's unclear why Isiah's parents allegedly did not take him to a doctor and abused him in the way that he was allegedly abused, and the other child, apparently, from what we've been told at this point, was not treated that way. Now, this bond hearing, again, it was held because Destiny Dionne, the mom, tried to argue that she deserved bond. Her attorneys said that she wasn't a flight risk or a danger to the community, but the judge, it seems, shut that down. She is being held without bond. She's still in custody, as is her husband, Joshua Latimer. He's being held without bond. He's also no longer a member of law enforcement. He was fired by the South Carolina Highway Patrol. He had been a member of it since 2017, but once his arrest made the news, he was fired from that department. Now, we also found some wedding pictures from this couple. In fact, the wedding website building up to when they were married in 2024. The website has several pictures, including some of Latimer holding that little boy he allegedly killed. Now, one might not expect that the man holding this child would be charged with his murder and such horrific abuse, but that is allegedly what happened in this case. Joining me now is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Josh Corman. It's always great to have you on Law&Crime. This case is certainly horrific and difficult to talk about, so I appreciate you coming on to explain how these cases work now going forward. It appears that there's a lot of scientific evidence as far as the boy's weight, the condition the body was in at the time. How much of this case will be about that and just the condition he was in at the time that he died?
I mean, I think the overwhelming majority of the evidence from the prosecutor is going to be what you just said. You know, the medical examiner's testimony is going to be crucial. And the medical examiner is going to kind of put into context what all of those things mean, whatever the body weight, where the body weight should have been, whatever was found in his stomach, the other conditions about living. The medical examiner's testimony will probably be the most important part of the trial, I would imagine. In these kind of cases, that's usually where they're the expert. They're the ones that can really kind of put the scientific evidence in context and have the jury kind of understand what the child was going through.
And just hearing the description of what young Isiah looked like, it's just so difficult to think about. One quote that was used was "skin and bones." I'm sure there are going to be images of this child that will be shown to the shown to the jury if this case goes to trial. How do you, as a prosecutor, and you're telling the story about what happened, take such delicate images like that? How do you present them to the jury in a way that will be effective?
Well, I think just seeing those images is going to be extremely effective, and there's probably not a lot else that the prosecutor has to do besides just showing the jury that, and you kind of, you're appealing to their emotions, but not, putting it in their face, trying to be somewhat delicate with it, because there's not a lot that you have to do. And I think in some of these situations, prosecutors get in trouble because they try to hammer things too home to the jury, and the jury does not appreciate that, right? You're kind of insulting them when you keep going on and on about things like that. So just showing the pictures, like I said, having the medical examiner kind of explain those things and explain like how this child would have been feeling, not eating, and all that kind of stuff, I think speaks for itself. And so I think the more that you try to push that, kind of the more that you end up turning off jurors in cases like this.
I think about the charge they're facing. I mean, they're facing a homicide charge. And I know that that differs from state to state, but we often see people who are accused of neglect in cases of child abuse. But in this case, it seems like they're going to have to show some intent that this was purposeful. As a prosecutor, how do you do that in a case where, I mean, the condition of the boy was just so horrific?
Yeah, so I think in a lot of states, you're right. In the state where I'm in, this would be like a felony murder case that the child died during the course of aggravated child abuse or aggravated child neglect. And that's kind of the same thing that South Carolina has. It's homicide by child abuse that carries 20 to life. And it basically is for someone who is responsible for the child that does not provide adequate food, shelter, health, nutrition. And as a result of that, the child dies. That's the way that the statute reads. And I think the way the statute also reads is for someone else could be held responsible almost as an aider and abetter. The statute goes through, and I think that is maybe 10 to 20 years or something like that, depending on what their level of involvement was. So in this particular case where you have the mother charged as well as her boyfriend, it could be that they're going to be charged as a different point under the statute or a different clause under the statute that will offer different ways that it could be punished as far as the years ago. But you're right. The underlying felony in this, or the underlying bad act, is the aggravated neglect, the neglect of the child or abuse of the child. And as a result of that, the child passes away or the child dies, which makes it a homicide case.
And so you have Destiny Dionne, who is the mom, and then you have the stepfather, who is the now former state trooper in South Carolina, highway patrol trooper. He's the stepdad. And I feel like in some of these cases, we often see a step parent being involved. What is it about, maybe just from cases that you've prosecuted, child abuse cases like this, where you have this dynamic where it's the stepfather or stepmother who's being accused of the abuse, but also there was a younger sibling living in the home, and that child seemed to be fine. I know it's impossible to make sense of a lot of these stories, but just what is it about that dynamic that seems to come up a lot in these cases?
I think you're right. And I don't know exactly what the relationship was in this, but I know what I had read, that I think there was a younger child. It didn't say how old, and it made me wonder if the younger child is the biological child of, I guess, of Joshua, the guy who had been a state trooper. And maybe that is something there was a problem in that relationship, right? Because the older child was not his biological child, and I don't know where the father was for the child that is deceased, but there could have been that dynamic in the relationship of, well, I didn't want him here anyway. I didn't want him living with us, or I'm not paying for him or taking care of him. He's not my responsibility. Because I know I had read something also that I think Isiah had lived with the grandmother for the first couple of years of his life and then went back to live with the mom, which makes me question what was going on all along, right? That he was not living with his mom or had been somewhere else before. So it sounds like there had been problems or issues maybe before Joshua ever became involved in this child's life at all. So I think you're right. That is something that we see a lot. And in my experience, that has been one of the kind of motives for that, is this, that sometimes a step parent just doesn't treat another child as their own, and kind of resents the fact that they have to take care of that child, or that the biological father is not involved, and they take it out on a child who's not theirs.
And obviously, I mean, from what we've been talking about, you have these horrific images, horrific reports from a medical examiner who would take the stand and just go through every single thing that they're talking about. I mean, it's almost, I know it was likened to what, you might see in a foreign country, a place, or, a war-torn country, a place that famine exists. Like, that was the condition that this boy was in. How important is it as a prosecutor to also figure out, as you're building your case, the reasons as to why Isiah was not in the home for the first couple of years of his life? What happened when he was born in terms of the dynamic in this family? Would that play into a role if this were to go to trial?
I think so, because I think those are questions that the jury is going to have. And to the extent that they're going to be allowed, to the extent the prosecutor will be allowed to present that evidence, I think that would be important just to give the jury the whole context of what was going on. The problem that sometimes you get into, though, is it's Rule 404B, where we talk about prior bad acts and uncharged crimes, right? When you're in a trial, the jury should only be focusing on the allegations of the case itself and not anything that may have happened in the past or any previous bad acts. And so that's a delicate area for the court and for the prosecutor to try to figure out what they can bring up and what they can bring in to explain to the jury the whole picture without violating that rule. And that is something that does come up all the time in cases like this of child abuse or sexual abuse, of what evidence is going to be admissible, because it's all going to be things that would be interesting to a jury and all things that a jury would like to know. But legally, under legal relevance rules, there's a lot of things that the jury does not get to hear about because it may be too prejudicial and it may affect their decision.
And I'm sure we'll see for the suspects, now defendants, their attorneys do some of that jockeying, maybe try to get certain pieces of information taken out, seeing if there's any sort of technicality that they could pull. But I also think there's going to be this moment, if this was going to go to trial, where you do take those images, which we haven't seen, but from what's been described, it's just horrific. And the prosecutor is going to put those images in front of the jury, and then the jury is going to look to you as the criminal defense attorney for what do you say to that? I mean, what is the defense in a case like this?
Well, I think that's going to be a hard thing for both defense attorneys, and it may be something where each defendant is going to be pointing the finger at each other to some extent. This could be something where, and again, I'm just completely making this up. I have no idea if these are the facts of the case or not, but you could be, investigating to see if there had been domestic violence in the home and if the mother, was being abused as well, and whatever was going on in the home, it could all be blamed on Josh, right? That it was his home, he was the breadwinner, and he was the one who was abusive to everybody in the home, and he's really the one to blame. But it's going to be hard for anybody to look at a mother and said, how could you let your child go through something like this? How could you not leave? And even if you were just getting away for yourself, you should have done something for your child, something to help your child or send your child back to your mom or whatever that is. So those are going to be very hard, and hopefully these two people have some type of explanation for what was going on. Because, as a defense attorneys, we don't just come in and make stuff up. We have to go with what our clients tell us and what the evidence leads us to believe. But I'd be very interested to find out what excuse they have for how this child could have gotten in the condition that he was in.
Take me inside. I mean, the room, for the defense attorney, they get brought on, whether it might be a public defender coming on in this case, and they sit down with this woman whose son was found in this horrific condition. And whatever the explanation may be, but if she says something along the lines that, clearly just looking at the law, that it's child abuse, I mean, how do you build a defense on that? Even if the excuse is something that no one outside of that room would ever believe to be something that could be acceptable.
Well, you just have to listen to the client, and you kind of have to go where the facts of the case lead you to. And sometimes the facts are not on your side at all. And then part of the defense is to try to pick away the prosecution's case. And there are cases that you go into that you just don't have a good affirmative defense. Your basically job is to make sure the state does their job in presenting that case, and you make the state, jump through all the hoops that they're going to have to prove the case, and you try to cross-examine their witnesses and question all the facts that they're trying to elicit to give your client the best chance. Sometimes there just isn't a good excuse, and in this case, without talking to the clients, I don't know what their excuse would be, but when there isn't, then that's really what you do, is you really have to try to just pick apart the state's case.
I'm sure there's a lot that we still don't know in this case, but we've certainly learned a lot that it seems that prosecutors have moving forward. How likely would it be, with how strong the evidence is, at least against Dionne and what was said reportedly at this bond hearing for her, how likely would it be that she would take this to trial?
Well, the overwhelming majority of cases never go to trial. I don't know what the percentage are in this jurisdiction in South Carolina, but I think, nationally, it's well over 90% of cases are not going to go to a trial. They're all going to be disposed of some other way. And if the evidence is as bad as it looks like it to us, then that's certainly something a defense attorney is going to be doing also, is trying to find a way to, whatever extent they can, to kind of mitigate the damage for their client and get the best disposition they can try to get worked out with the prosecutor. Because when you go to trial, this is something where you're not going to have any sympathy towards your client, from what we can see right now. And there is no more sympathetic victim than a child in a situation like this. So I think every attorney is always going to be looking to find a way to try to mitigate the damage against their client, and essentially it could be to save their life, to give them some opportunity where they may be walking out free again. But that's all going to be in the hands of the prosecutor. The prosecutor has all the power to decide how they're going to negotiate the case, or if they're going to negotiate the case. So like I said, the percentages, if you're going to just bet on a case, it would be that it does not go to trial just based on the odds. However, these are the kind of cases that often do go to trial, because these are the kind of cases that the prosecutor really wants to push forward.
This is a state that has the death penalty in South Carolina. It's possible. I mean, just the details are certainly horrific and startling. Are these the type of cases, I mean, especially with this charge, a murder by or homicide by child abuse, is this something that could make her eligible, and Joshua Latimer for that matter, if they're found guilty for the death penalty?
So I don't believe it is, based on the charge that they have, which was, I think, for her, or at least on the homicide by child abuse, I think it's 20 to life. So I don't believe it has the aggravating circumstances that would qualify it for the death penalty. But I don't practice in South Carolina, so I don't want to speak. I may be completely wrong about that, or there may be other facts that come out that later on in this case they decide to elevate the charge and charge it as a capital case. But from the way it is right now, I do not believe it's eligible for the death penalty.
No, you're right. And when you say capital case, I just remembered, yeah, that would be what it would be in South Carolina. I know this one is a 20 to life possibility. Just lastly, Josh, I mean, as a defense attorney, if, for whoever's defending, both people in this case, I mean, what is the type of jury that they might be looking for that could give them a chance?
I think a jury that's going to question things, a jury that just doesn't come in and rely just on their emotions, that someone that could see these pictures and still force the case to have to, force the state to have to prove their case. So you're going to, you obviously want some open-minded jurors. Sometimes you get into the issue about parents, whether parents would be good jurors on this, or young parents or older parents. It could be that younger parents who maybe know and have dealt with dealing with young kids, or maybe kids that have behavior problems or something like that, and maybe kind of understand or can be somewhat sympathetic to where a parent may have overreacted, like in abuse situations. In a situation like this case, where you're talking about a kid who was essentially starved to death, that's going to be very hard. And I think the kind of jury I would be looking for is just someone who would make the state prove their case and question everything, as opposed to just coming in and accepting it based on, the horrible allegations that there are.
Those allegations, they sure are horrible. Very tough case. We'll see how it plays out. Josh Corman, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.